Good afternoon, and welcome to ARTbreak. My name is Brent Harris. I am the head of the sculpture department here at the Kirk Newman Art School. The Kirk Newman Art School Post-Baccalaureate program is in its 9th year, and more than 50 artists have completed this program. I'm sorry, the 7th year, my bad. It's a 9-month residency, and it's designed for aspiring artists who want to grow and strengthen their art practice in a supportive community we have here. And they're allowed access to professional studio facilities and guidance. This is a culmination of their 9-month project, which is a group show that they have started, and that's out here in the Commons area. It opened last Friday and it runs through June 4th. The exhibition is current. We want to wish everyone here, all the residents, growth in their careers and success in all their creative endeavors after leaving the KIA. During this art break, you'll hear from Kirk Newman Art School residents Lauren Gaunt and Mickey Williamson about their experiences and artistic pursuits. And without further ado, Mickey.
Hello, I'm Mickey Williamson. Thank you all for coming. Let's get started. So I studied at Western Michigan University before I came here. I graduated in, oh, sorry. Yeah, I can try and speak up. Yeah, so my name is Mickey Williamson, and I studied at Western Michigan University before coming here. I graduated in 2021, and I studied sculpture and also did some ceramics while I was there. Here you can see some of my first ceramic pieces. I did those in raku, which was a fun process. I got to learn about the atmospheric firing processes, and later on got into wood-fired pieces that you'll see later on. And on the other side, you can see my first installation I had in a gallery on campus at the Richmond Center. And then around that same time in 2018-ish, I started working in galleries as well. And so I was doing sculpture and also working in the galleries. And then in the last year, I've kind of transitioned into the KIA, doing similar things, working in the gallery and also doing sculptural ceramic type artwork. So when I started at Western, I was undecided. And so I started in just basic foundation classes, doing drawings, mostly like 2D work at the beginning, because that's what I was comfortable with from my high school experience. Here are some of the examples that I drew. And then once I started sculptural work and installation-based artwork, I decided I wanted to incorporate school with something that I enjoyed doing, which is climbing trees. So I took a chair that I bought at the surplus store at Western and installed it in a tree using some rope. And then later on, I came back with my tripod and my camera and did some long exposure with my camera light. And I climbed the tree in that 30-second exposure. So you can see that like string light, that's just from me climbing and kind of waving my light around. But that was one of my favorite pieces I did at Western because it really incorporated something I love and then also some fun sort of art. But this piece I did right before COVID hit, or a few months before COVID hit, and it was untitled at first, but my experience through COVID, I was able to look back at this work and give it a new name. So I titled it Suspended Education because my education was temporarily suspended due to COVID. So I thought that it was interesting. This is my first time having my own artwork change throughout like its existence. And so I got to see like how even I would think of my piece before and how that changed because of my experiences. So that kind of influenced some of my work to continue. Okay. During the pandemic, I was kind of pushed into making more digital artwork. I also got a new computer, so it kind of worked out. I was able to use 3D modeling softwares and also Photoshop. See the piece on the right, that's a Photoshop piece. And then on the left, that's a 3D model, like spaceship I made and then rendered. At a certain point, I got a little better and was able to get a little more photorealistic renders. So in this piece, I actually built everything you see here, and I'll actually go to the next slide. This whole log cabin, I built every piece to it, and then added the texture on top and was able to render this kind of lifelike cabin scene. And you can see in this photo that the computer is really powerful and able to get like the reflections on the windows and things that you can't really do on your own a lot of the time. So this is something I'd like to kind of go back to, I think, after my time here is done. Here you can see my first time really building a sculpture in 3D modeling software, and then I was able to bring it to life. And it's also one of my largest sculptures and my first large-scale sculpture. And that leads me to my senior show at Western. I was inspired by both some textures that I was able to find throughout my process learning ceramics, and the wood firing process kind of remind me of artifacts, like really old artifacts that maybe have historical context that maybe is misplaced, and then more recently people are trying to add on their own ideas of what maybe those pieces would be. So then I went back to thinking my own art in the future, or if someone else were to see this without any context, I'm interested in the different ideas that could come out of these abstract rock-like pieces. And the two photos in the center, those are ceramic wood-fired pieces that I was really excited to make because that rough chopping of the clay form and that combination with the wood fire, it gets really nice. It amplifies the texture and it just looks really nice, I think. And on the right side there, that piece will actually be at the West Michigan area show here. I believe that opens on the 27th this month. So you'll be able to see that. And finally, I'm moving on to the KIA. So I applied here to be a ceramic resident because I really wanted to continue making ceramic pieces. And once I got here, I was trying to do that really hard for a long time. And I wasn't really clicking with the material like I had in the past. And the ways that I had made things before just weren't working out for me. So I wanted some change, and I kept trying to force myself into changing my ceramic works, but eventually decided to just kind of step away from that and go back to steel work, which is kind of where I began my sculptural career. I did some like welding work. So I went back to that after having some failures and just small experiments in some classes that I was taking. I took raku classes, which was really fun, and I did get some good pieces, but you'll see those in a second. Yeah, here is a Sagar raku piece, and that's a process where you add a few different chemicals and wrap it up in tinfoil, and it gets this like desert-like look that is somewhat similar to the wood fire look that I like. So I was really happy with this process and was experimenting a little bit with that. Also, this is a raku piece, but a different technique. The rim of it is a copper raku, and the rest of the body was just left to to absorb the carbon material or whatever happens there. And this texture was done with a rubber rib, carving away at it, and I was really happy with how that looks on the black body of the vessel. But this was around the time that I decided to kind of abandon my ceramic practice and push myself harder into the steelworks. So you'll see that next. Here is when I was still in the process of switching from ceramics to steel. I was still into the idea of a vessel, but I was just more interested in how I could make a vessel out of other material and steel specifically. So Brent was helpful to teach me this technique of making a structure and then bending the steel around the form to make a cylinder vessel. And then we also had a good talk about how the piece is displayed. So on its bottom, it looks maybe like a vessel, but on its side, it could look more, to me, it looked like a fish body of some sort, like a segment of a fish body. So I kind of ran with that idea. And here you can see my process with these. That form there in the middle, that piece was what came next after the smaller vessel. And you can see on the left, that's in the process of wrapping that steel around. I was working with the perfect thickness of steel that I could bend with my own strength, and I didn't have to use any heat. And I really liked that. I don't like to add unnecessary tools to my practice. So kind of staying minimal with my practice was nice. And I was really happy with how these turned out. These are the two final pieces that you can see. They're on display out there. I hope you can go see them, or already have maybe. So the piece on the left, titled Dawn, I added that fin because the vessel wasn't completely straight, so it had a ridge to it that amplified that fish-like look I thought of at the beginning. And it also turned it into a mug-like vessel, something you'd drink out of in the morning. And also this vessel is kind of launching out of the pedestal or out of the water, I would think of, similar to the sunrise. And then in comparison to dusk, which is the fish, I would think of diving into the water with a sunset. And this was the last piece I made. I got into F1 Formula racing this year, and so I was making just a fun race car piece with ceramics that was just kind of my last try to do something fun that I liked. And when I was done with it, I painted it with acrylic, and it needed a place to live. So I came up with this idea to make the corner of the racetrack like this out of steel. And apex, the name of it, is referring to the placement on the curve, because in racing you want to have a perfect turn to maintain speed. So that was kind of what I was thinking with the placement over in the corner. That's, I think, where you'd want to be. I'm not a professional race car driver, but that's what that's referring to. What is next? So I plan on staying here. I'm working in the galleries here, and that's been a really good time. And I've learned a lot through both that and the residency, and I'm looking forward to being able to take classes while still working here. And while I'm not taking classes, though, I'm also looking forward to kind of going back to my apartment, the things I can make at home without having studio spaces, being able to limit myself. And I think that can kind of facilitate some growth in the future. So that's what I'm hoping for. And before I get to questions, I just want to say thank you to everyone at the KIA for really making this place feel like family. So I look forward to continuing my time here, really. And feel free to scan this or look up my website for more of my work. And any questions? Courtney?
Throughout your work, what I keep finding is your relationship with surface treatment and texture throughout it, very intriguing texture. Could you talk a little more about it?
Yeah. Should I go back maybe to one of the other slides? Okay. Yeah, so this is where it began. I was actually inspired by an artist, Lars Boltz. He does a similar choppy technique. You carve with a knife away, and then you kind of tear the clay to get this look. And I'm attracted to this look because I like climbing, and when I would go travel with my family as a kid, if we ever found like a cliff or something, I would always run up to it and try climbing it. So I have a pretty like up close experience and history with rock faces and looking close at rocks. So these textures to me is like I'm building my own rock. And that's another reason. These pieces I make are solid, which is not something that's typical with ceramics. So there's chances for cracks to develop and things to happen in the firing that I'm not in control of. So that style is me trying to mimic nature and make my own forms with kind of nature-inspired texture. And I think just having those textures kind of led into more work like this. I got a little more playful here with like a rubber rib rather than the sharp knife edges. So you can see it started to evolve. And then I also see similarities with the steel work that I do here, like the segments, the geometric shapes, kind of playing with the form overall. I think that it's another way that I can play with like color in a different way. It's not necessarily color, it's just adding to the form in a different way. So, oh, I don't know if I repeated the question. Your question was asking about the texture, by the way. Any other questions? Brent?
The digital work that you're interested in,
Mhm.
Are you interested in that as a final product or more as a way to sort of augment your sculptural work?
I think, okay, actually, I got to repeat the question, sorry. As far as my digital work, am I interested more in digital as final product or making that into a physical piece? I'm interested in both. I've never done 3D printing, but that process interests me, and that's something I might want to get into later. So like just taking that file and then having it appear in reality would be really cool. Something that I'm interested in trying out eventually, but also I think using the digital art as like a foundation and keeping it digital, but kind of stretching it and playing with different ways of displaying it would be fun too. And any other question? Yeah.
With your metal work, do you start out with a sketch that drives you toward that final design?
So do I sketch my steel sculptures before making them? Kind of. I don't like to sketch all that much, but for that fin piece that you saw here on the right, so on the left I didn't sketch it, but on the right I did sketch it to give me a better idea. So when I do have an idea, I have to force myself to sketch it because I'm not a fan of drawing. Since I got into sculpture, I really like to just dive in and start making things typically. And any other questions? Yeah.
I'm curious about the titles about the fish cross section. Where did they come from?
The fish pieces?
Yeah, on the previous slide.
Yeah. So I was saying, I see these pieces like in motion. So I see the one on the left diving or jumping out of the water like sunrise. Like if you're to look over one of the Great Lakes while the sun's rising, you see the fish jump up with the sun, and also the mug-like shape referring to like a drink of coffee in the morning, and then dusk, the sun kind of following the fish back into the water at the end of the day, and where I cut kind of halfway at the belly where it's disappearing into the surface. Any other questions? All right. Oh, Rahima?
How long does one of your sort of larger sculptures take you to build from beginning to end?
Okay. How long does it take to build my larger sculptures? So I like to work fast. So once I get started, I'm really, I'm inspired. I'm in there as much as I can be. And so saying I'd get maybe 10 to 20 hours a week, it would just take me a couple weeks. But on the form on the left, it was an experimental piece. So I was still learning, and it took me quite a bit longer, probably a couple months to really get to a finished product there. But then since I had a little more practice, the piece on the right was done in probably just over a month. And then going back to my senior show, the sculpture on the left, well, really this whole show I put together in 3 months, and I had, I think, 12 pieces or 10 pieces, something like that. And the piece on the left, I was working throughout that time on that piece, but I was able to use some found objects for it, which helped speed the process. But I welded that whole ladder, and that took me maybe just a couple weeks. All right, Lauren, are you ready? All right, please go.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay? All right, I'm Lauren. My project is called Death of Control, and I want to talk to you mostly about my process and my research. I'm going to start off with a little bit of background about my work. I'm primarily a painter. This is my senior project. I graduated from Kalamazoo College in 2015, and I painted this series of my own wounds. So if you've seen my art out in the hallway, you can see it's about bodies in a lot of ways. So I've been working with skin, bodies, portraits for quite a while. And my work has evolved a lot since then, and I would like to talk a little bit about that evolution. So after I graduated, I kind of moved around a lot. I was working at a maritime museum teaching and having a pretty good time, but in the middle of my job, I got sick. I'd started having seizures towards the end of college, and they had been continuing to get worse. So I ended up having to leave that job and had to find a way to sort of keep my creative spark alive in this time where I was feeling really isolated and disconnected from my creative self. So this is the first painting I did that kind of acknowledged that. This is a portrait of me getting an EEG scan that I made before I really found treatment. It was actually kind of an emotional and strange experience making it, because I had a seizure in the middle of painting it. And I kind of abandoned working on art that related to my body for quite a while. I spent a lot of time doing portraits and commissions and landscapes and stuff that didn't feel super deep while I worked kind of not artistic related jobs. But once the pandemic started, I had a little bit more time to dabble and create in different mediums. And I started to get back into making work about healthcare and medicine. You can see here my tapestry on the side. was a result of doing some research about medical folklore. It's kind of the first work that I did that pushed me in the direction that my project is at this residency. And then the print on the right is something that I made as a fundraiser for a healthcare group that I founded. We were advocating for Medicare for all. And I did this as like a little fundraiser to help raise funds for people in need of medical care. And that process was really informative. It looks a lot different from the art that I'm doing now, but when I did this art, I also had the opportunity to talk to other people that were going through, similar and different situation from me, where they were having trouble finding healthcare. We had some really sometimes intense, intimate conversations about our health, and what made us feel isolated and what made us feel connected with each other. And it also kind of gave me a little push to making more political art, and thinking about societal issues as well. So that was a fun outlet, and it was exciting to do art that felt a little bit different. So a little bit more time passed, and I'd been doing more commissions, and I started getting a little bit jaded about doing commissions. I got this huge canvas and had the person that was commissioning a painting for me fall through. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to make something for myself because I need a break from doing this work that was getting a little bit frustrating. So I finally decided, okay, I'm going to do my first painting that really tries to visualize the experience of what it's like to have epilepsy and have a seizure. And I was a little bit nervous about making it because I was like, I don't want it to be really contrived. I don't know if anybody's going to relate to it besides me. So it took me a while to really get through this. I painted over, and ended up with this piece. And I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure how I felt about it, so I posted it online on a support group that I had talked to other people with epilepsy on a lot, and I got a really amazing response from people telling me like that they related to it on such an intense level. I had people write poems inspired by it, and I was just like sitting at my computer crying over like how exciting it was to have art that moved people. And at that point, I really felt like, okay, I need to continue with art like this because I don't think I'd ever felt as good about my art as I did then. I felt like I was touching people in a way that was really exciting. So I applied for the residency here with the proposal to kind of continue this work and delve into it on a little bit of a deeper level that went outside of myself. And I started doing a little bit more research. So I'm going to talk about my research a bit before I show you my final pieces. I started looking into kind of archaic ways that epilepsy and other neurological illnesses were treated. In ancient Greece, they called epilepsy the sacred disease. So it was, and this goes through a lot of different cultures. It's a very common theme that people with seizures and epilepsy were possessed by spirits or demons. And I thought this juxtaposition of the photos I saw of people in asylums and religious imagery was really interesting. The exorcisms were kind of a very common theme in paintings like this that went all the way back to biblical and medieval times. There were, sometimes I found it hard to figure out which images were, medical or of people having fits, as they would have called them, and which were like saints in ecstasy. So these are some different photos that I found and I was inspired by. And I also looked into, like I was saying, archaic treatments and rituals. On the left here is one in particular that I thought was really interesting. In Scandinavia, it's called passing through, and they would take the patient and pull them through a hole that was naturally occurring. So here they're passing through the epileptic child through a hole in the tree, and that's supposed to remove the spirits from the body. It's like a kind of cleansing ritual. And then on the right is a picture of one of the first EEG scans, which is obviously modern technology. And from there, I did a little bit more research about the stigma around epilepsy through the years. This is a picture from the Craig Epileptic Colony in upstate New York. There were multiple places like these across the world. Epileptics and other people, this also applied to people with other neurological illnesses and psychological illnesses, were isolated because they were seen as unclean, unfit to participate in society. And a lot of times they were treated as like places to cure people, but that wasn't always the case. A lot of times they were also places where these patients were really intensely surveilled. They would kind of treat them as criminals in some places and basically keep them away from the rest of the world. In these facilities, they produced a lot of photography that was really influential to my work, as well as etchings and drawings that physicians made. This in particular was a book that was really interesting. I'm not going to try and pronounce the French name, but this was a really famous hospital and asylum in France, where this photographer, Jean-Martin Charcot, would photograph patients, mostly women, in the midst of having seizures or what they would call hysterical fits. And I found these photos really intriguing, just because they were composed in sometimes very beautiful ways, but they were also, very disturbing. A lot of these patients were not consenting to the photos. They were going through these really traumatic things, and set up in this way that like evoked religious imagery. Their faces are often upturned towards the sky. So I looked at a lot of these pictures before I started painting. I always do a lot of thinking and pondering and research before I really start delving into my project. So I started taking photos of myself just because I wanted to have a lot of reference photos to start my paintings. And I was also interested in incorporating movement into my paintings. Like the first one I did, and I showed you the portrait in ictal phase. I wanted to get the feeling of actually having a seizure across, because it's something that's so hard to describe in words. I wanted to find a way to do it visually. So there was actually a photographer who filmed and took photos in the 1800s. Not just of people having seizures, but he was famous for his work kind of mimicking motion. These on the right are actually photos of someone having a convulsion. And similarly on the right is another photo from that hospital in France. And here's a few more. So with that, I started developing my own images. I took a class in Procreate, digital drawing, when I was here, and I had a lot of fun working with that and sort of manipulating images, both of myself and of these historical images that I found. And I played around with that a lot before I really put anything on canvas. I took photos underneath myself pouring water and lots of pictures of myself moving in ways that I might have felt before when I was having a seizure. And these are just experiments that I did. And finally, I want to talk about my paintings. So these are the start of a couple. I did a lot of painting and repainting and lots of layers, and thinking about how I could incorporate some of that religious imagery, but also make it my own. This is one of my first completed images. All of my paintings are like proportional to my body. And I accompanied them with quotes that I'd read in my research, many of them which were testimonials from patients, which was not very common in the time. The patients were usually being observed and not talked to. So I wanted to convey that in my imagery, sort of make these paintings from the view of the patient and not just from somebody surveilling the patient. And this painting is drawing from themes of purification, holy water, exorcism. They would use amulets, things like that. Through the years, sometimes they still do this, very rarely, but disturbingly. This one I did, this was kind of the most layering I did. A lot of them are historical images that I laid upon an original image of myself. And the quote is from a woman who went through one of the first experimental brain surgeries that they did for epilepsy that were varyingly effective. And this last one, I really wanted to draw upon the spiritual. The quote is from the Bible, actually. And I was thinking about the moon goddess when I did this one. The moon was a frequent theme because it was seen as, that's where we get the word lunatic. So I wanted to evoke that a bit and evoke some of those images of saints and patients in this sort of transcendent, unconscious state. So that is all my work. Any questions? Yes, Courtney?
So your work on display has a very distinct color palette to it. Will you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So I really wanted to use dark colors as the background because as someone who has seizures, that feeling really feels like you're falling into nothing. And I wanted it to sort of evoke that feeling of like losing control of your surroundings and your body, and not really feeling connected to the outside world anymore. Yes?
You were speaking about having some anxiety about depicting yourself after that initial portrait.
Mm-hmm.
Would you mind just talking about how it felt to go back to depicting yourself, and if that was cathartic, or was that scary, or how did that feel making this new work?
Yeah, absolutely. It did make me feel a bit anxious to start portraying myself in this way. I often felt very uncomfortable thinking of what my body might look like when I was having a seizure, and it was really I don't know, it was a really weird experience to try and visualize that. But doing this work was pretty cathartic because it did make me kind of have to consider like how my body had changed and seeing trying to think. Yeah, like finding a way to portray that to other people, not just as observers, but as how it feels to be inside my own mind and inside my own body. Yes.
Have you shown your work portraying your seizures to your neurologists? Are they are getting to see this?
They have not. I've had a lot of neurologists over the years.
I think it would find it fascinating. I'm not the same person. I just think
Yeah.
that something that has puzzled people for so long. We have lots of great things, but actually showing this is
Yeah, I mean, I would love to. I've mostly shown it to other people with the same illness as me, and not so much physicians, but it would be really interesting to hear what they had to say too. Yes?
Can you speak a little bit more about medical folklore?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of common themes through different cultures. like I said, a lot of it has to do with possession. So a lot of the different cures were sort of like ritualistic. Like the lupine flower would be used as sort of like to appease the moon goddess, who was supposedly kind of infecting the people with the illness. So that was one thing. The ancient Greeks would do some really strange things. One of the cures they did was to try and feed the patients the blood of criminals. So that was pretty wild. They did a lot of bloodletting, which ended up being dangerous and not helpful. Yeah. Yes.
The juxtaposition of historical cures, mythology, and folklore with this like modern digital manipulation of photos seems like an interesting collision. Can you like talk through how you thought about that, or what motivated you to do that juxtaposition?
Yeah, the juxtaposition between digital and ancient cures and stuff. I think it was just helpful to. Let's see, that's an interesting question. It was helpful to have like a new medium to sort of find through lines between those things. Like looking at photos that had similar imagery, looking at the way the cures had developed over time. It was cool to have a medium where I could visually put them together. It made it more, really more apparent how they had progressed over time and how certain things related and how some things haven't changed. Anyone else? Yes?
So there's a lot of complexity in all your pieces. And I'm curious as to, I know you took a lot of photography kind of as a starting point. But once you start putting things to canvas, do you sort of have a vision of what it's going to look like, or does it evolve as you go along?
It evolved a lot. I do mostly use reference photos, but I changed the reference photos a lot. I would have something on canvas, and then I'd take another reference photo and sort of overlay that on top. So yeah, it definitely morphs a lot. I'm not super methodical about my work, so it kind of changes as I'm going when I like get new ideas or one painting that I'm doing starts to turn into something else. It might inspire my other paintings too. I never really finish one painting and move on to the next. I was doing all of them at the same time. So yeah. Yes.
If you're under treatment at the present time, would that skew the work in a different way?
When I'm under treatment? I'm not sure. My seizures have been fairly well controlled for a while. I would say the treatment that I've gone through that was the most like emotionally affecting, I've already done. Staying in the hospital for a week, being kind of getting my seizures induced forcefully to find a cure. But I do think that like the process of continuing to live with this illness, even when you're getting better, there's always something new that comes up, little things, it's something that you live with your whole life and you're never really cured. So that's something I thought about when I was doing this work, is that it's something that stays with you forever. And I would like to continue this work and think more about that. Anyone else? Yeah.
How would you say this residency program allowed you to, what were you able to accomplish with this residency program that you don't believe you could have otherwise?
Yeah, I think the main thing was having people to share the work with. Before I did this, I was kind of working in a hole in my studio at home. So having other people to talk to about the work really helped me grow, I think. The thing that I missed most from college was having critique. And when I had my work displayed outside, I met someone else that had epilepsy within like 10 minutes, which was pretty amazing to see people connect with it. I mean, having the space to make the work and show the work was just in itself really, really huge. Anyone else? Okay, thank you so much.